Hi everyone, thanks for being with me. I'm going to ask a really interesting question this time, and I'd be most interested in your response as to whether you think that Andrew Bolt is a racist. Because I think he is. He's many other things. He's narrow minded, he's capitalist, he's a spokesperson for Murdoch Press through Sky News and through the Murdoch papers as well. He's an appalling individual and he's been caught out. And this time he's been caught out by the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen. And this all happened recently when he criticised Chris Bowen's speech at the COP28, in which Bowen wanted to refer to Indigenous people and the contribution that Indigenous people have made to the environment, the land, the sea, the sky. And it seems to me that Bolt has no idea as to what those concepts are and the value placed on them by Indigenous people today, and that there are lessons that we could learn from Indigenous people in relation to how we can manage those aspects of our environment. So in this particular article, Chris Bowen calls on News Corp to sack Andrew Bolt for columns saying Australians sick of kowtowing to the primitive, he says. Chris Bowen has called on News Corp to sack Andrew Bolt after the controversial commentator penned a column suggesting Australians are sick of kowtowing to the primitive. Bolt on Wednesday criticised the Climate Change Minister for staging what he contended was a one-man clown show at the United Nations Global Warming Jamboree in Dubai, which included a sermon, it wasn't a sermon, it's just a talk, linking the government's disastrous race-based tribalism with its ruinous crusade against oil and gas. And I would suggest that Bolt himself has a similar crusade, which is really about attacking the left of politics, particularly the Labor Party, in relation to any particular view they have, no matter how correct it is, no matter how scientifically based it is, he sees it as a reason to attack them. It goes on to say, Bowen opened his national statement at the UN-led summit by acknowledging that at the heart of action on climate change must be profound respect for those people who have cared for our respective lands for millennia, Indigenous people across the world. Now, for me, it's very difficult to argue against that notion as a general notion, that there are many Indigenous people, whether they be in China, Japan, United States, Canada, India, Africa. There are Indigenous people who have a heritage that goes back thousands and thousands of years. In Australia, we have Indigenous people that can go back for 60,000 years. So it's the longest continual people on this land. And we need to acknowledge that. And there's many things that we could learn from Indigenous people about how to care for, how to look after the land, the sea and the sky. But we don't. We tend to ignore them. And I know that Bowen, in this particular talk, was suggesting that there are things that we could learn from them. We just need to listen to them. Bolt responded to Bowen's remarks by declaring them brainless posturing, which I think is a lot of what Bolt does himself. So it's a bit of projection, in fact, and arguing that everyone in Australia is surely linked to some Indigenous people somewhere on the planet for millennia. It's a stupid friggin' argument to start with. I don't know who he thinks he's linked with. You know, Neanderthal man, clearly, I would suggest Bolt is linked to. So I wouldn't argue with him on that part, but I wouldn't imagine that many people can actually connect themselves directly with Indigenous people from a certain part of the world. I don't think that that's necessarily possible. I don't know where my family came from Cornwall. Who knows who the Indigenous people were in the UK? Got no bloody idea. Maybe they were the Celts. I don't know. Those people. Bolt went on. Bowen wouldn't have dreamt that the Indigenous people he claims have cared for the lands for millennia include the white tribes of Europe, let alone the Japanese and Han Chinese. And why not? Because those people left their Indigenous knowledge behind. So They were primitive people, is what he's saying. Their knowledge and understanding of the land is not primitive. Left the indigenous knowledge behind as they used reason and science to work out better ways to live without dying early and poor. Well, I don't know who he think invented the boomerang, but I would suggest that that was a pretty nifty invention to get a stick that flies. So, in terms of knowledge is how to survive and where to look for food and what medicines what plants you could use for medicines. All those sorts of things were pretty relevant, and we could learn from Indigenous people in relation to that. And I must say that in terms of Chinese herbs and spices and medicines, clearly that has come from Indigenous people in that particular country, from which we could benefit. Bolt went on to say, in contrast, we're supposed to show profound respect for the Indigenous knowledge, some of whom are now in the federal court trying to top a $5.6 billion offshore gas project. And the reason why they're doing that is because they have a spiritual connection with that particular land, and particularly with the Dreamtime story. And I could think of many Christian stories that are dubious, to say the least, for which Christians and there are stories in terms of the Quran and Muslim beliefs and so on that are pretty dubious anyway. So let's just take a break from whether someone's spirituality actually has a touch of reality in it in the first place. Bolt contended that Bowen was not just racist, but anti-science, which makes him a threat to Australia. Before declaring that the Labor front bencher could be dumped, Bolt wondered whether Bowen and Anthony Albanese realised many Australians are sick of the kowtowing to the primitive. Well, quite frankly, buddy, you're the primitive. You're the one without any sense of understanding and knowledge about the way Indigenous people have contributed to our environment and our land. What's this bit? Bowen took to social media though, and said, like most Australians, I usually ignore Andrew Bolt. I don't, but on this occasion I won't. His attack on First Nations people as primitive is racist and disgusting, and News Limited should sack him. And I agree. It is about time you dickheads got rid of this man, because he's not only an embarrassment, he is also selling us information which is not true. And also is demonstrating a bias which, he could be critical, and it's okay to be critical. I'm critical all the time, as you're probably aware. But you can be critical and you can also be balanced in that criticism. And when it comes to Sky News and people like Andrew Bolt and Paul Murray, they're just not. They're just looking for an argument anywhere. But I think what this does show for us is that, in fact, there is more than just a disingenuous version of what they're saying. This is also about racism. This is about extreme right stuff that tells people that the Indigenous people in this country are primitive. And because they're primitive, then we shouldn't take any notice of their demands, the things that are important to them, such as a Dreamtime story, and the fact that capitalism is going to encroach upon a certain piece of land, in this case sea, and as a result we should ignore their rights to have their spiritual beliefs upheld. And I can tell you now, if we started to attack the Christians in relation to that, we'd be criticised left, right and centre. So, but because they're Indigenous people, apparently it's okay to make those sorts of assertions. I love this bit. I'll just finish with this. He says, I do not call Aboriginals primitive. Oh no, that's the way it seemed to us. Indeed. Now, when a person ever says this, you know they're racist. This is the worst thing a person could say in order to attempt to hide their non-racist views or their racist views, but to let people know that they're not racist. I have Aboriginal friends far more sophisticated than our energy minister. So he's called Indigenous people primitive, and then he's telling us that Chris Bowen is less significant or more unworthy, whatever you care to call it, than Indigenous people who are primitive. So on a scale, Chris Bowen's way down there because Indigenous people, because they're primitive, are above him. And of course, he knows lots of Aboriginal people who are smarter than Chris Bowen. I have no doubt there are probably Aboriginal people who are smarter than Chris Bowen. Certainly a lot of Aboriginal people probably are smarter than I am. I get all of that. It's not about a hierarchy in terms of our intelligence. It's really about us respecting their culture, their understandings, their spiritual beliefs, and not just giving lip service to it, but putting something into practice that acknowledges the value that we should attach to Indigenous people and their worth. So let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that Andrew Bolt is racist? Please let me know, and also subscribe to my channel and ring the bell and do what you need to do for further notifications. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.